I was always a skeptic when it came to the weird paranormal stuff, but now I'm a true believer thanks to a series of strange occurrences that I experienced firsthand. I'm a small-town cop in rural Michigan. I was born and raised here, and I can't imagine being anywhere else. When I was growing up, I remember stories about haunted places and Bigfoot sightings. They were just stories to scare kids, and I eventually grew out of it. There's one story in particular about an old abandoned house in the woods on the outskirts of town. It was built in the 1800s, and the patriarch of the family supposedly went crazy, claiming to see demons before killing his partner and kids, then himself. There's no record that it actually happened, so I chalked it up to urban legend, but generations of kids dared each other to go in that house by themselves. Even I went there in high school. It was like a rite of passage. Sure, it's creepy, but it's old and dilapidated, so what do you expect? Nothing ever happened anyway, and you end up scaring yourself with anticipation. In recent years, it's been a home to junkies, so it's not very safe. I think that contributed to waning interest in the place until a tragic incident a year ago. A few high school kids went to the house and messed around with an Ouija board. A few days later, one of them hung himself in the house. It was a pretty big deal around here, and a lot of people were spooked. Some were convinced the kid was possessed by demons, but if you look at his history, he was bullied at school and didn't have many friends. In fact, the group he went with were not his real friends, and they admitted they only took him there to play a prank, which they filmed and posted online. That being said, his family claimed he kept talking about a being he kept seeing leading up to his death. He described it as human, but not human. It was gaunt and naked, with pale white skin. Its eyes were black, it had no nose, and it made a clicking sound with its tongue and thin lips. People wanted to believe the sensational version, but I thought it was a textbook case of a poor kid being bullied. The thing he described sounded like a junkie he may have run into at the house, and maybe he had some bad dreams about it. Nonetheless, it started a ghost challenge trend online where kids would go in the house and post videos on social media. I've seen some of these videos and they're clearly fake, designed to set up a cheap jump scare. Some even use poor CGI effects. But 6 months later, there was another incident. A girl and her friends took up the ghost challenge. Then late one night, she drove off a road and died when she crashed into a tree. Again, people said it was demons, but really that road is dark, twisty, and infamous for car wrecks. As tragic as it was, I didn't question it because accidents happened there frequently. We talked to her friends and they were scared, claiming the girl rambled about a strange being she kept seeing in her bedroom. What she described was the exact same thing the other kids saw. I admit it was weird, but rumors about the other kid had already been going around, so she could have easily been influenced by that. The incident was enough so that there were calls to demolish the house and make the area off limits. I was tasked with boarding the place up and cordoning it off with police tape. Meanwhile, plans were made to tear the house down in a week. I drove there by myself one afternoon, and maybe it was because of everything going on, but I was pretty anxious. I went in the house to chase out junkies, and as I looked around, I heard a weird clicking sound, like something you make with your tongue. I immediately thought about what that kid heard, but I was sure it was someone high on drugs. I did a sweep of the house but found no one. I kept hearing that clicking sound, always coming from another room, but when I'd look in that room it was empty, and the sound would come from a different room. It started to freak me out, so I quickly nailed the door shut, put up the police tape, and hightailed it out of there. As I walked to my car, the clicking sound followed behind me at a distance. I started to run, but the sound got louder and louder until it was directly in my ear. It made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I finally jumped in my car and sped off. I didn't hear that sound anymore, and I refused to look in the rearview mirror, afraid of what I'd see. When I got home, I sat in the car for a while trying to process what happened. It was long enough so that my partner eventually came out to see what was wrong, but I didn't tell her. Later that night, I saw it. I woke up after a horrible nightmare and I couldn't move a muscle, like sleep paralysis. A figure stood at the foot of my bed watching me. It was ghostly, naked and pale, exactly like those kids described. Its eyes were black, round voids. My partner slept soundly next to me, but that thing wasn't interested in her, it only focused on me. I was petrified, but I couldn't move. I couldn't even scream. I stared at it for hours until dawn, when it finally faded away as the sun came up. I've heard sleep paralysis can be terrifying, and similar to what I experienced, so I told myself that's just what it was. But then it happened again. The second time, I woke up to find the figure standing right next to me. The third time, it leaned directly over me from the head of the bed, which is impossible because the bed is pushed up against the wall. I barely got any sleep and I felt like I was losing my mind. I was afraid to tell anyone because I'd be ridiculed, but my partner and coworkers definitely noticed I was distracted. A week later, they finally demolished that house and everything stopped. It took a while for my mind to settle, but I was eventually able to sleep again. I can't prove that what I experienced was real, but I know in my gut that it was, and I don't doubt those kids anymore. Hopefully, we won't be plagued by that nightmare again. I would appreciate your opinion on what I experienced in Missouri a few summers ago. My spouse and I were overdue for a vacation, and we wanted to get out of the state and forget the world for a while. We ended up renting this amazing cottage on hundreds of acres of land in Missouri. It was gorgeous. There were rolling hills and woods as far as the eye could see, and a beautiful river that ran right through the property. My favorite thing about it all was there was a hot tub in a covered lanai where you could sit and take in the sights. I wanted to check out the whole property one day, so I followed the property line and ended up going deep into the woods. The wildlife around there was incredible, and I even saw black bears and wild boars roaming around carefree. It was nature's beauty at its finest. I would love to know what that property cost. I got to this one area of the woods where the river ran right through, and you could follow the river for miles. I did this for a while, and I saw this big, majestic bison drinking right out of the river. I was pissed I didn't have my phone with me to take a picture, but I was determined to get as close to it as possible. The closer I got to it, however, the less it looked like a bison. It was huge and furry like one, but it had these jagged spines along its back like nothing I'd ever seen on an animal before. It also had one giant horn on top of its head like a rhino. It was the strangest looking creature I'd ever seen before. It started freaking me out the closer I got to it, and I decided to keep a healthy distance between it, as I had no idea what it was. It took massive gulps of water at a time, and I could hear it from a decent distance away. Suddenly, the beast looked at me, and I was terrified. It had one giant eye, and it screamed at me so loudly it shook the ground. I immediately took off into the woods, and I must have been so scared that I passed out. I woke up later that night in the dark with no phone and no flashlight miles away from the cottage. I had no idea where I was and didn't know what direction to start walking in. I kept screaming my spouse's name, but I didn't hear anything back. I was really scared, and it crossed my mind that I might die in the middle of the woods that night with nobody around to find me. I finally found the river and figured I would follow the river and keep an eye out for anything that looked familiar. I kept walking and walking alongside the river, and eventually I smelt the faint smell of a campfire. My spouse must have lit one. I kept following the river, and the smell of the campfire got stronger and stronger. Finally, I saw the campfire in the cottage and made my way towards it. By this point, I was beyond exhausted, hungry, and dehydrated. I got close to the campfire, and I must have passed out again. The next thing I know, I woke up in the hospital with my spouse sitting next to my bed. I told my spouse about the nasty beast I saw. I talked about the large bison-like body, the jagged spikes across its back, the giant horn on its head, and the most unusual part, its big singular eye. My spouse told me I was just hallucinating from the dehydration, and I just needed rest. The nurse came in to check on me, and I told her all about the creature I saw. She told me about an urban legend that was unique to Missouri called the Myuu, which fit the exact physical characteristics that I described. When I looked it up, it said that anybody who saw it became crazy, writhed around in unspeakable pain, and was only relieved from these ailments through inevitable death. Luckily, I never experienced any of those awful things, and I am still very much alive to tell the tale. It has me believing, however, that maybe what I saw wasn't a one-of-a-kind creature, but a more common creature that was relatively rare and commonly mistaken as this mythical one. I will say one thing though, the beast's scream was the worst thing I've ever heard to this day. The scream was not an ordinary roar of an animal. It shook me and everything around it, and it made me immediately fear for my safety and my life. Everyone I tell this story stops believing me the minute I mention it only had one eye, but that's the part that's the most burnt into my memory. What a hideous creature I saw that day. I will never forget seeing it and hope I never see it or anything like it ever again. Let me know if you have any insight on what this creature could have been. My dad was driving and I was in the passenger seat. We were going to visit my grandparents for the weekend, something we used to do about twice a month. It was about a 2-hour drive up the Wyoming mountains surrounded by beautiful views and heavy woods. I always looked forward to it because my dad and I could get some quality time together. On this night, it was very dark and a little foggy. My dad and I were making good time when we saw a man standing in the middle of the road. As we got closer, we realized that the man was completely naked. He was bald and didn't have any hair on his entire body. "Damn meth heads," my dad uttered under breath, something he uttered quite often. On top of being completely naked, the man looked weird. He had no expression on his face and was very pale. He started walking towards the car and it made my dad and I uncomfortable. As he got closer, I saw that eyes were completely black. Not dark, I mean black and beady. Something was definitely not right about this guy. As the man got closer, my dad put the car in reverse and was going drive by him and continued down the road. As we started driving backwards, the man started running at us. My dad floored it, and the scariest thing happened. The man dropped on all fours and ran at us at a crazy speed. He was salivating all over his face and his neck kept popping back disturbingly as he ran. As soon as there was a little distance between us, my dad slammed on the brakes, put the car in drive, and swerved around whatever was chasing us. The creature dove towards the car and got really close to my car door, but we were able to escape untouched. I will always remember its face a short distance from my window looking at me. It was the most horrible thing I've ever witnessed. It had nasty yellow teeth that looked really sharp, and its body was ghostly white and veiny. But the worst part is still those little black soulless eyes. I turned and asked my dad what that thing was, and he told me that's what happens when you take meth. It was a pretty quiet ride after that. We were both trying to figure out what the hell that thing was. My dad kept looking in the rearview mirror during the drive, and I know it was to make sure that thing wouldn't get us. I mentioned to my dad that its neck moved around like crazy as it ran, and he explained that meth heads' bones deteriorate from the drug use, and it causes it to look like that. I mentioned the sharp yellow teeth, and he said that soon they would get even worse and fall out due to drug use. I asked how he was able to run so fast on all fours, and he said that they lose strength in their legs and must learn to run around like that. I asked why the eyes were so black and devoid of life, and he said that meth attacked the eyes and made people go blind. He had an answer for everything, so I just dropped it, but I never forgot about it. When we got to my grandparents, I told them all about it. I told them about its freaky eyes, bizarre teeth, nasty skin, and how it charged at us on all fours, and they told me it was just my imagination. That really hurt, having loved ones accuse me of lying, but later I figured out they were just trying to calm me down and protect me. I remember when we were heading home, I asked my dad if we were going to see the creature again, and he pretended like he didn't know what I was talking about. When I explained the creature and how it charged at us, he told me it must have been a vivid nightmare. I knew I wasn't going crazy, and I was pissed at my dad. But being a parent now, I kind of get it. Life's tough enough as it is. Can't have your children worrying about something they can't defend themselves against. Back then, my dad blew it off, but now we talk about all the possible things it could have been. For a while, my dad thought it was the Slender Man, but the Slender Man supposedly has no face. This thing definitely had a face, and a creepy one at that. We also thought it could have been a vampire, but its teeth were long. Everyone I've told this story to have a different opinion of what it could have been. Some have claimed it's a creature called a crawler, and that thing apparently also runs on all fours. Some people have told me it was an animal, and the fog made it look like a humanoid creature, which is just insulting. I drive an aviation fuel truck at LAX, so I get all around the airport and I pretty much see everything. Most days, though, I'm close to the terminal, refueling planes before they take off. One day, when I had just driven back to the fuel farm to refill the truck, I got a call asking me to make an unscheduled fueling. They said that the plane I was supposed to do next hadn't arrived anyway. I was told to go out to this hangar that I'd never been to before. Since we usually refuel planes at the terminal, I was kind of surprised. When I got out to this small hangar, I saw just one small regional jet sitting outside. I checked, and it was the one I was supposed to refuel, so I attached ground wire and then the fuel hose like always. While I waited for the plane to fill up, I looked around and noticed there was another hangar a few hundred feet or so away from the one I was at. That hangar looked kind of old, and it was fairly small too, not big enough for the Airbus A350 or something like that. As I watched, black cars and SUVs kept coming and going by that little hangar. Instead of the mechanics and fueler who wear orange safety vests like me, I saw guys wearing black or blue jumpsuits. I don't know, it wasn't just the outfits. Something about them looked different than regular airport workers. The small plane didn't take long to get fueled. I took off the ground wire, disconnected the hose, got back in the truck, and recorded it on the refuel sheet. Once I finished, I looked over toward that hangar again. I didn't see anyone going in or out, just the cars parked in front. I decided to just drive by it on my way back to the terminal. I didn't think anyone would notice a fueling truck just getting a little close to it. I don't know why, but when I got close, I decided to roll down the window. I didn't get more than 50 feet or so from the cars parked in front, but I heard a banging noise from inside the hangar. It didn't sound like anything you'd expect to hear from a hangar, not like a plane engine or a mechanic working on a plane. When I heard that noise, I pictured huge fists pounding on metal. I don't know why. I told myself I was being crazy, but then I heard a roar coming out of that hangar, like King Kong or something. I rolled up the window and drove away. I was sure something was going on in that hangar. When I got home that night, I checked Google Earth to see if I could find that hangar, but I couldn't see it. It wasn't on the map I had of the hangars at LAX either. I mean, I could see if it was too small to be on my map, but why wasn't it on Google Earth? That was weird. I hadn't seen any signs on it indicating what it was either. I thought I'd try to get over there again sometime and see if I could get a better look at it. But our schedules are pretty tight. We go from one refueling to the next, and there's no extra time unless a plane gets stuck at another airport. Finally, one day a plane couldn't make it to LAX because of a mechanical issue, and I had an extra hour to kill. I had to go to the fueling farm to fill the truck, but I had enough time to swing by the hangar. This time I looked at the hangar itself more closely. I still didn't see any markings on it. No names of airlines that use it. No numbers. Just 3 cars were in front of it this time. One guy came out in a dark jumpsuit as I drove by, but he was hurrying into one of the cars, and I don't think he noticed my truck. After his car pulled away, I drove closer, rolled down the window, and heard banging again. This time it sounded like a fight. I swear it sounded like 2 big monsters in there throwing each other against the wall. But I don't know. Maybe it was something else. All I know is it didn't sound normal. The next day, I was really surprised that I got a break again. In fact, I had even more time because a bunch of flights got grounded in Chicago for weather. We were just sitting around with hardly any planes to fuel. When the truck needed more fuel, I headed back to the fuel farm with at least a 2-hour break ahead of me. This time, I went to that smaller hangar that I'd first seen the weird hangar from. I thought if I parked near it for a while, no one would notice. I sat there and ate my lunch, just kind of idly watching the mysterious hangar. From that far away, there was no way I could hear anything, even with the windows down, so I just watched. Cars came and went, and then a plain white truck that looked like a big moving van backed in. The driver didn't get out. I wondered if they were loading something into the back. A few minutes later, another truck just like it backed in. I was going crazy wishing I could see what they were doing. But the way they were backed in totally blocked my view. Both vans pulled out, and after that all the cars parked there slowly left. Once they were all gone, I drove the truck up to the hangar. I got really close this time and rolled down the window. I heard nothing. It was totally quiet. I figure whatever was in that hangar was gone. They must have taken it away in the truck. I still don't know what it was. Since then, anytime I manage to go by the hangar, it's totally quiet. But something tells me they're going to put something else in there. I'm going to keep watching it and see what happens. I'll just get to the point. I grew up in a haunted house. My childhood home was not some creepy old mansion next to a cemetery like in a movie. No, it was just a regular house in a regular neighborhood. My earliest memories of the house were pretty uneventful, but unfortunately my mom died unexpectedly of a heart attack when I was 9. My older brother took it pretty hard, and my dad was a complete mess. I struggled with it too, but we stuck together and got through it together. It was about 6 months later when strange things began to happen. It was little things at first, the type of things you don't notice right away. Like I'd put the TV remote down, go to the bathroom, but when I came back, it would be in a different place. It was enough to notice, but also subtle enough so that it could have been my imagination. After a while, it started to happen more frequently and more obvious. Like stuff would disappear and reappear in a different room. Doors would open and close by themselves. And late at night, I'd hear footsteps in the hallway. My mom had a sewing room and used to spend a lot of time there. She'd make all kinds of things, blankets, shirts, dolls, dresses, whatever. She just loved to create. This was actually the room where she died. My dad was hesitant to get rid of anything, so we just left it as it was. I used to watch Mom sew all the time, and after she died, I found myself hanging out there a lot. I began to notice the smell of Mom's perfume. I found comfort in that, and as a little kid I just thought the smell lingered from when she was alive, maybe caught in the fabric or clothes. Sometimes I'd smell it right before I went to bed, as if Mom was tucking me in and saying goodnight. I became convinced that Mom was checking in on us, and I wasn't scared. My dad and brother were aware of some of the things going on. I mean, it's hard to ignore doors opening and closing by themselves or stuff mysteriously disappearing. But Dad got offended when I suggested it might be Mom's ghost, so I just kept everything to myself. That's when I started seeing the shadow. It was only wisps out of the corner of my eye, always darting out of the sewing room. Soon after, I'd see an actual figure standing in the hallway. It was a silhouette, shaped like a person, but it was amorphous, not a solid figure. What creeped me out was that it was jet black, blacker than black. The shadow was always preceded by the smell of my mom's perfume, and at first I was sure it was Mom, until I noticed it was taller than her and had a broader frame. And while the previous incidents were innocuous enough, this shadow gave me a different feeling. It had a presence, a power to it, but it was negative and dark. One time I was hanging out in my mom's sewing room, just sitting at her table, drifting off to sleep. I could smell her perfume as I dozed off, which gave me a sense of comfort. But then I heard her call my name, a whisper, directly in my ear. I woke up and saw the shadow standing in the corner. I could feel it looking at me. The hair on my head stood straight up, and there was this sense of urgency to get out of there as fast as I could. I ran for the door, but the shadow came right at me. I burst into the hall screaming and slammed the door shut. My dad and brother came running to see what happened, and that's when they noticed my shirt was torn and there were scratches on my shoulder. I started crying and told them what I saw, but my dad actually got angry and refused to believe it. I never went in my mom's sewing room again, and we kept the door locked. Thing is, whenever I walked by the room alone, I smelled her perfume and heard her calling me from behind the door. It would never happen with my dad or brother around, only if I was by myself. I was afraid to talk to anyone about it, but I finally got the nerve to ask my brother. He had never seen the shadow himself, but he believed me. Or he at least believed that I believed what I saw was real. I just felt like Dad was hiding something from us. My brother had no explanation but thought I should cut Dad some slack because he was still having a rough time. As long as we kept the door to the sewing room shut, I never saw the shadow. It still tried to lure me in with the smell of Mom's perfume and her voice, but I ignored it. I couldn't help but think it had something to do with her death. A year later, we finally moved out of that house. Thankfully, there were no strange occurrences at our new home, and whatever I experienced gradually faded from my memory with time. Over the years, it's been hard to think about Mom and not be reminded about what happened. Recently, I've become concerned because I started smelling my mom's perfume again. I was in denial at first, but then I started hearing her call out to me from empty rooms. I'm now seeing wisps of shadows out of the corner of my eyes. You don't have to believe me, but I swear this is true. I don't know what to think, and I'm just bracing for what happens next.